ever feel like there's more to education than just memorizing facts? Like it's about developing something deeper, more ingrained.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, get this. We're going all the way back to 1907 for this deep dive.
Wow, okay.
To an article from the Parents' Review. And let me tell you, they were really onto something back then.
I'm intrigued. What did they have to say?
Well, they were already making this connection between education and our habits.
Habits.
Yeah, they were arguing that education, it's not just about the stuff we know, it's about how we think, how we act, and how those habits really shape us.
It's interesting how even back in 1907, they were already recognizing that connection.
And get this, they weren't just, speculating about this.
Wow.
They were referencing actual physiologists.
Yeah.
Who had observed that our thoughts, the way we think habitually, leaves a real physical mark on the brain.
Yeah, that's incredible, isn't it? I mean, this was like the very early days of neuroscience, and they were already starting to kind of grasp this idea of neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
How our brains literally change and adapt based on what we repeatedly do.
That just blows my mind. It's like, our brains are like taking notes on how we live our lives.
Exactly. It's like every time you walk through a field, you create a path. Right?
Right.
And the more you walk that same path, the more defined it becomes, and the easier it is to follow that same route again and again.
Right.
Our brains are kind of the same way.
Wow.
The more we think or act in a certain way, the stronger that neural pathway becomes. It's like wearing a groove into a record.
That makes so much sense, though, as to why it's so hard to, break a bad habit or even just try to learn something new.
Right.
Because we're literally fighting against those ingrained pathways in our brains.
But think about it this way. That same principle that makes it hard to break bad habits also works in our favor when we're trying to build good ones.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point.
And, this article highlights one of the most fundamental habits for learning, and that is attention. They actually call it the hallmark of an educated person. And honestly, in today's world with so many distractions, I think that's probably even more true today than it was back then.
Oh, absolutely.
All right.
Because you can have all the information in the world at your fingertips, but if you can't focus long enough to actually absorb it, then what's the point?
Exactly. And that's where this article, I think, gets even more intriguing.
How so?
They kind of push back against this notion that education should be effortless, like this fine, careless rapture.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
They acknowledge that building these habits, learning deeply, it takes real effort. There's just no way around it.
So no shortcuts.
No shortcuts.
But there's got to be some kind of payoff.
Right? Oh, the payoff is huge.
Otherwise, why even bother?
Yeah. This article reframes this effort not as some tedious chore, but as a challenge with these incredible rewards.
Okay. I like that.
Think about it, like physical exercise, right?
Okay.
It takes consistent effort. Sometimes it's really hard,
Yeah, for sure.
But the results are so worth it.
Raps.
Our brains are similar. The more we exercise our attention, our learning muscles, the stronger they get over time.
And, speaking of making things easier, this article shares this fascinating story about the Duke of Wellington.
Oh, yeah.
They were famous British military leader.
Right.
And it's like a perfect illustration of how we can actually use this idea of effort to our advantage.
Yeah, the Duke's bed, it's a classic example of how even like these small intentional choices we make can really reinforce these powerful habits.
Okay, so tell me about what was so special about the Duke's bed? Did he have like silk sheets shipped in from China or something?
Not quite, actually. It was kind of the opposite.
Oh.
The article mentions that he actually chose to sleep in a very small bed, almost like uncomfortably small.
A small bed. Okay, they're not exactly a luxury item, but why?
Well, it wasn't about, saving money or anything like that. It was
Really?
because he realized that if he wanted to turn over in his sleep, he would practically be forced to get up.
Right.
So he basically engineered his environment to make hitting that snooze button, impossible.
That's incredible. He basically hacked his sleep schedule.
Exactly.
I love that.
He turned this potential point of weakness, right, this urge to stay in bed, and he flipped it into this trigger for action.
So smart.
And that's really, I think, the key point this article drives home. It's not always about like brute forcing yourself with willpower.
Right.
It's about being strategic about it and understanding the power of association,
Right.
He connected the idea of this small, less comfortable bed with the action of getting up promptly.
So it's like we can all kind of apply this Duke's bed strategy to our own lives.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Want to read more? Maybe you replace that phone on your bedside table with a real book.
Oh, that's a good one.
Or trying to exercise in the morning. Lay out your workout clothes the night before.
Oh, yeah, like those little things that make it easier.
Exactly, those little nudges. They really do matter. It's about making those good habits more inviting and then those tempting bad habits a little bit harder to fall into.
Right, like that saying, make it easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing.
Precisely. But what I find really fascinating is that this article doesn't just stop at this practical side of habit building, you know?
Oh.
It goes deeper. It starts to explore how this idea of habit connects to our moral and even our spiritual development.
Okay, now that's interesting.
Yeah, and that's where I think the story of young Thomas de Quincey comes in.
Okay, I have to admit, when I first saw like a story about going to church in an article about habit formation, I was like, what does this have to do with anything?
Right. It's not about, pushing any one religion or anything.
Right.
But it's trying to illustrate how seemingly mundane actions, when paired with intention and reflection, can actually take on a whole new meaning.
Okay.
And de Quincey's experience growing up, going to church every Sunday, I think really exemplifies this.
So what was it about his experience that stood out, that really connected with the article's message?
So de Quincey talks about how he was really deeply moved by certain prayers and also by the beauty of the stained glass windows.
Oh, interesting.
And the sensory experiences that were woven into this ritual of going to church every Sunday, they ended up fostering this sense of awe and wonder within him.
That's fascinating how those specific sights and sounds, became almost like these anchors for him, for his developing spirituality.
Exactly. And, while the specific context might be different for everyone, right?
Of course.
The underlying principle here is really powerful.
Yeah.
It's this reminder that habits, even the ones that we might initially think of as just routine,
Right.
can actually be these incredible pathways to profound personal growth and deeper meaning in our lives.
And that feels especially relevant today, don't you think? I mean, we live in this world that's just overflowing with information and trends are constantly changing.
Oh, absolutely.
It's so easy to get swept away by all of that.
Right. So having that strong foundation of good habits, almost like those anchors.
Yeah.
It feels more important than ever, I think.
Yeah. It's like they provide that stability,
Right.
So you're not constantly being blown around by every little thing. It's like those deep roots that help a tree, weather any storm.
I love that analogy, and it's actually a really fitting one as we kind of bring this whole conversation back to, our listener.
Right.
Because we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have, from the science of how habits actually work in our brains,
Yeah.
to the Duke of Wellington's, strategic sleeping arrangements.
That's right.
And of course, who could forget young de Quincey finding that spiritual inspiration, in those stained glass windows.
Right.
But I think the real question here is for our listener, what is that one habit that you would like to cultivate? Yeah. Something that really resonates with you personally.
Right.
Maybe it even connects to like your interest in education.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, think about that for a second. And remember the Duke's bed.
Right.
What is like one small change that you could make?
Yeah.
One idea that you could link to that habit to kind of nudge yourself in the right direction.
And it doesn't have to be this huge, overwhelming thing.
Exactly.
Start small.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just, putting your phone in a different room while you're trying to study.
Oh, that's a good one.
Like a modern day Duke's bed for your attention span.
I love it.
But the important thing is to be consistent.
Consistency is key.
Because it's those small choices made over time that really start to pave the way to lasting change.
Yeah, it's all about laying those tracks, like that article said, so that the transport cars of our lives can run a little bit smoother.
Exactly.
A little bit more intentional.
A little more smoothly.
And as you're kind of embarking on this whole journey of, habit formation, I think it's so important to remember de Quincey's experience.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes, those most profound moments of growth, they don't come from these big grand gestures, but from finding meaning in those, simple but consistent practices.
Absolutely.
The little things we do every single day.
That's right.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you, listener, for tuning in.
Until next time.
We'll see you next time.